Commission Secretary, Ms. Falcon, and we'll be able to go ahead and have you speak on that particular issue. I want to make sure that everyone, when they do their comments, that you stick to the agenda item on the agenda, be respectful, and we're going to try to limit the time to 3 minutes, so try to get your point out very quickly. So thank you all very much. At this time, I'd like to have Commissioner Yakispak lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Falcon, would you do the roll call, please?
Allison Terry.
Here.
Bill Hogan.
Here.
Chad Corville.
Here.
Bill McPherson. Here. Bobby Somney.
Here.
Gary Smithco.
Here.
Mark Ackersack.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, there are 7 commissioners in attendance, and we have a quorum. Secretary Monse is also present.
Thank you. Secretary Monse, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I'd just like to remind the commission that we prepared lunch for you today in the back in the enforcement section, so you won't have to be running downtown. And hopefully that'll give you a little incentive to end your meeting a little early, okay?
Thank you.
It's kind of a cookie I'm putting out there.
Thank you, sir.
And the other thing I'd like to mention is that on February 13th at the mansion, our Wounded Warriors fishing project that we put together for red snapper, they are coming in to have lunch with the governor, the boat captains, CCA, all of the people who were involved, our staff. And I certainly want to take this opportunity to thank our staff to put that together at the last minute. I know I made mention last week at the end of the meeting, but it was very successful for the first time. And certainly, hopefully, in years to come, we can continue that so that we can expand that program and give those our wounded warriors an opportunity to fish some offshore red snapper. Okay, and I'd like to invite you to the commission also on the 13th. It'll be for lunch at the mansion. So if you let me know, give me an RSVP. I certainly want to put you on the list. So
Thank you very much, Secretary Monasset. What time's lunch being served?
today,
Yeah.
10:45.
Thank you.
We'll call it brunch.
At this time, I want to look to the commission to see if we want to adopt the minutes from the January meeting. Second. Got a motion by Mr. Samony, a second by Commissioner Corville. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Unanimous. At this time, we'll have the commission, any special announcements or personal privilege. Does any commissioner want to say anything?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Corville?
I'd like to, for us to observe a moment of silence for a former department employee, Mr. Alan Insminger, who passed away recently. I happen to know Mr. Allen and work with him for a number of years. One of the finer man on the planet. I just think it'd be appropriate if we could offer him a moment of silence. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Corville. Major Skinner, would you like to give us?
Mr. Chairman, I think you.
If I may, well, we're in personal privilege. I did want to say we've got agenda item number 9, which is a notice of intent to consider modifying oyster leasing policies and procedures and to lift the oyster moratorium. This is something y'all heard last month. There was a motion made to bring it back this month. I can tell you that the department has received some input from stakeholder groups. I think that input is worthy of consideration and further evaluation by the department. It would be my recommendation to bring something formal back to y'all in a couple of months. So I just wanted to let you guys know that's going to be a recommendation on number 9 in case people are here to comment on that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Corville?
Hearing that, I guess I was the one last month who wanted to hear it today. I think Mr. Garrett makes some valid and legitimate points, and I think it's always our policy to put forth the best document we can to the public. So in the spirit of that, if it's appropriate, I'd like to make a motion that we take agenda item 9 and move it to the April Wildlife and Fisheries Commission meeting. The reason it wouldn't be heard in March is I think we're meeting up in Alexandria. It's probably more appropriate to have that discussion here in this building where the most people can have an opportunity to attend. So that's my motion. Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor to go ahead and take this item off of the agenda and move it to the April meeting based on, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a second by Commissioner McPherson. Discussion, Commissioner Smitko.
Is April enough time, or do you want it in May?
I believe we can do a thorough evaluation by April and come back to you with a formal recommendation at that time.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Major Skinner, will you give us our January 2019 enforcement report?
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. For the month of January, we had 7 boating incidents, 4 injuries, and 0 fatalities, 1,329 written citations, 332 written warnings, and 13 public assists. As usual, there are a few news releases in your folder. Here's a brief synopsis of those news releases. Agents arrested 2 Coshada men for possession of an illegally taken deer, failure to wear a hunter orange, and criminal trespassing in DeSoto Parish. After receiving multiple complaints of people criminal trespassing on the Dole Hills Mining Company property in Red River and DeSoto parishes, agents set up surveillance on the property. The subjects were found to be hunting on the property without permission, not wearing hunter orange, and in possession of an illegally taken 9-point deer. In addition to the criminal fines and possible incarceration, the men may also face civil restitution totaling up to $2,033 for the replacement value of the legally taken deer. There's a picture of the deer behind you and on the monitors. Enforcement agents cited a Rayville man on January 18th in Tensar Parish for taking over the season limit of antler deer, taking over the daily limit of deer, and failing to comply with deer tagging requirements. On January 19th, the same subject was arrested for hunting deer during illegal hours, hunting deer from a public road, hunting deer from a moving vehicle, discharging a firearm from a public road, taking over the season limit of antler deer, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Agents were on patrol in Tensar Parish on the morning of January 18th when they found the subject with a freshly harvested antler deer. During questioning, the subject admitted to harvesting 2 antler deer on January 16th and another antler deer earlier in the hunting season. He also used one of his nephew's deer tags on one of the antler deer he harvested on the 16th. The next night, the subject was found in possession of another freshly harvested antler deer. Agents were able to determine that the subject took the deer from his truck while his juvenile son and nephew were with him. He also used his son's tag on the deer. There's a picture of it. In addition to the criminal fines and possible incarceration, the subject may also face civil restitution totaling up to $5,691 for the replacement value of the legally taken deer. 2 Louisiana men pled guilty in St. Martin Parish Court for intentionally concealing an illegally killed alligator. Each subject was ordered to serve 100 days in jail suspended, to serve 1 year of probation, to pay $900 in fines, and to perform 80 hours of community service, and they had their hunting and fishing privileges revoked for 1 year. Agents were on patrol near Catahoula off of the Henderson Levee Road when they observed the subjects. As the agents were approaching the subjects, they saw one of the subjects go to the woods and discard something. The agents investigated the area and found the illegally killed alligator. This concludes the enforcement report, sir.
Thank you, Major Skinner. Do we have any questions from the commission? Commissioner McPherson?
Major, I'm going to ask somebody to tell us what the civil restitution is, unless you know, between a quality deer like the two that you showed us here as opposed to a doe. Do you know the answer to that?
I don't.
Maybe somebody,
You're saying 1,600 for a non-quality and it's 2,033 for a quality deer, but it's about 1,600 for a non-quality?
yeah, I think some of us would still like to look at that. I mean, that first deer there, if you shot him in a high fence, would be a $10,000 deer, and the other one probably $3,000 up, so you're better off just riding the roads and killing your deer and putting them on the wall. Another question that I have, we dealt with this a number of years ago, but
Commissioner, we're presently visiting that, the cost of restitution. That hadn't been looked at in a long time. So we're reviewing all of the restitution costs related to the animals taken. And we're going to be bringing something to the commission.
do you have a time frame that you hope to accomplish that in, like before next hunting season?
We'd like to have it in place by next hunting season. That, obviously, we're looking at it from a general update. So if this next hunting season would be year 9, depending if, how we can get that to the commission and get it implemented before next hunting season is going to be, because it's more than just deer that we're looking at. So the committee is getting formed now, and it's just going to take some time to get all the data that we use to try to come up with those civil restitution penalties for all the multitude of species that we are responsible for.
Okay.
Thank
Major,
you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I had another question. It seems like that there's a tremendous number of this month's report that dealt with failure to comply with deer tagging or harvest records. And I remember a number of years ago, there were a lot of cases made of individuals dividing deer meat after a weekend of hunting, in a deer camp or at a lease or something. And the agents would write them for not having their proper information. Would that be a significant portion of these cases, or are these cases where, like you illustrated, where the individual's not complying with the regulations and not putting his tags on game?
I think the majority of them are exactly that, just failure to comply, not actually complying with the program, doing the tags. And there's also a number of warnings there, and it's simply for people not, it's a range of things, not having the tags with them, not filling them out. But I think that's more along the lines of what you're seeing.
But not where they divide up the meat in camp and don't have, and they got it in their ice chest. And we used to do roadblocks and
we've gotten away
write
from
them
that.
up after them opening days and stuff.
Right. We've gotten away from that. I can check to see if we're having a tremendous issue with that particular violation, but I think it's particulars of the program, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McPherson. Commissioner Smitko?
When we do the, gentlemen, when we bring up if we have any changes to the restitution amount for the different species, when you'll put that on agenda, could we also go through, could you put on the agenda the collection process and those types of things? I had some information on it a while back as per request, but I'd like to have that on the agenda as well.
Yes, I think it would be appropriate at that time, because we'll have some experience with the program being implemented where we're at. We can also share with you some of the problems we're going to be
Yes, sir.
experiencing with the program and what we've taken care of and fixed. Okay,
Yes, sir.
at that point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Smitko. If we can try to get that sooner than later and get it sent by email to the commission, so that we have an ability to look at it ahead and move it through, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Major Skinner. Mr. Toomer, you want to give us some information on the hunting rules and regulations and that we're going to be looking at?
Absolutely. I can't wait. Good
Thank
morning, Mr. Chair. Congratulations on your new seat. Look forward to working with you for the next year.
Thank you. This is a group up here. Be working with all of us, and I'm really glad you're here to talk to us about all of this today.
Roger that. Good morning,
Thank
the rest
you.
of the commission. I'm just going to give a brief summary of public comment that we've received since the January 8th commission meeting. This may be slightly different from what you received yesterday around noon, because I tried to get the public comment up until the time of this meeting. If it is different, it's only, I think there was maybe one more opposed to the teal bag limit reduction and one opposed to the moving the coastal season date earlier in the season. But it's pretty easy to, I guess, comprehend. It's the same thing that I provided you with the public comment spreadsheet. Most of the comments received have been towards the amendment for the teal bag limit reduction. You see that's 136 opposed and 7 support, but you can see those numbers, and that's essentially all I have for public comment. All public comment for the first time, I believe, has been through email. I haven't had any phone calls or written letters. So this year is the first time that's been all email. So there are all the comments that I've received relative to the notice of intent. And with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Commissioner Yakusak.
Mr. Tuma, last week we discussed we discussed limited access areas, LLAs, and we discussed the new department's state-of-the-art app for self-clearing and the potential of including in that app a button or an option where a user could select whether or not he was using the limited access area on a given WMA.
Yes, sir.
Can you just provide us an update on that? I'm not suggesting you guys have it figured out or yet, but I'd like to hear if y'all made any or found anything else out.
Yeah, so I did check with the app developer. That would have to go through a whole new iteration. So we would have to enter into a contract. It's not something that myself or the program staff can change. I can add WMAs and I can change bag limits, but questions that are asked, I can't add that. So we would have to go back to the app developer. So we would have to enter into a new contract. And so we're looking at a minimum of $25,000 to $50,000 to get back into that system to develop changes towards that app. So that's where we're at. And I gave Secretary Myers or Assistant Secretary Myers that information. So right now, for the cost benefit, I guess it's our opinion, I'm free to say this, Randy, that data really, while we may be able to use it, we're unsure if it's worth the amount of money that it would cost to put that into the SEP app.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Mr.
Mr. Monset. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I didn't see your
I'm not at
eyes.
that status just yet, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Corville.
Quick question, Mr. Tuma, along those same lines on the app. If you recall, I asked if you could make a link on that app to where I could validate my deer tags. Did you guys have an opportunity to look into that just yet?
We were supposed to have that to where you could link to the department's website, you could link to the 1-800 game thief phone number, and you could link to validate the deer and link to the regulations. I'm working with the app developer and our OTS to make sure that is all incorporated in. For some reason, that hasn't been incorporated in, but we're working towards that.
Okay.
So that should be
trying
there.
to extract any more money out
No,
of it for
that's
that
no
one.
more. That was part of the original
Okay,
contract. So we're still waiting on those receivables to be delivered to us.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions from the commission? At this time, I'd entertain a motion on the notice of intent.
No motion necessary. This is receiving public comment.
Oh,
Number 7.
Do we have nothing more? Is
No,
it-
sir, that was just an FYI, that's the
That's all
public
we have.
comment that we've received.
Okay. I have no comment cards on this particular item. So, thank you very much, Mr. Toomer. We'll move on to, consider an amendment to the notice of intent, on the general wildlife management area, rules.
Okay, so last month I presented the notice of intent for the hunting season rule in WMA rules and regulations. This month, I'm going to bring forward 3 amendments that the department will ask the commission to vote on and approve. First one deals with wild quadrupeds and wild birds. And so last month, Commissioner McPherson, he expressed some, I guess, confusion of the wordage for the carcass ban importation. So this all we're doing was with our counsel, Cole Garrett's expertise, we're just kind of cleaning up that language to make sure that the proposal last month where the carcass ban, it is in effect for Mississippi land or Louisiana lands east of the Mississippi River are also covered. So that language that you see on the bottom, the green, kind of covers that. The confusion was technically, it's not importation if they kill it in Louisiana. So he cleared that up with just saying transport of any service from originating from Louisiana lands east of Mississippi back into what we call Louisiana proper, I guess. So that's one amendment. And then we just struck through that language at the bottom because it's not needed any longer. Second one will be general and wildlife management area hunting rules and regulations.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'd be in favor of considering each one as Mr. Tuma goes through, just in case we have some elaborate discussion on any one part of the 3 that you have to go. If it would be the pleasure of the commission, I'd like to consider them each separate.
Do you want to, talk?
So with that, I'd make a motion to make this amendment that Mr. Tuma just suggested.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Corville and a second by Commissioner Smitko to agree to the single change that we just spoke about. Any discussion on it? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. You can keep going.
Okay. The next one would be general and wildlife management area hunting rules and regulations. Allowance to hunt nuisance animals and outlawed quadrupeds at night year round and elimination of the permit needed from September to January. We proposed this last month at the request of enforcement. The only problem is that it is illegal to hunt after night and the permit is what allows you to hunt after night. So doing away with the permit would be against the law. So we'll have to retract this and pull it back. We will still probably try to bring this forward to the commission again through a separate notice of intent, but at this time we feel it's the best thing to do is just to pull it out so we don't run into any problems that we have.
Yeah. So what you're saying is it's going to be like it was last year?
Correct.
With this language?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If it's appropriate, Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to accept this recommendation in the form of an amendment to the NOI.
Second.
Got a motion by Mr. Corville, second by Mr. Yaksa. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you could have some public comment because you are taking action on it.
Okay, I will. Does anyone have any public comment on the previous motion or the motion we just passed? Hearing none, I will ask for that. We didn't have any comment cards on any of this, and that's the only reason I didn't ask, but I will after this following one. Mr. Tuma?
Yes, sir. Next one, proposing to make all limited access area rules and regulations consistent.
Wait, excuse,
You had a motion and a second, but I don't think the voice vote.
I thought
All approval.
Yeah.
it was unanimous. I'm pretty sure. That's okay. Thank you.
I'll remember that, Miss Susan.
I thought we voted on it.
Yes, sir, I think you did. I believe I was talking over the voice.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
I appreciate that because she's on me about 50-0, so I'll take a victory over her any way I can, okay? The next amendment that we're proposing is proposing to make all limited access area rules and regulations consistent. We're doing this to help the users. One of the biggest complaints that we have as a department is inconsistencies with regulations. So all limited access areas will carry the same rules and regs, which would be operation of internal combustion powered vessels prohibited September to January, and vehicles prohibited November through January in limited access areas. That basically allows trolling motor use in the limited access areas, but you can't have outboard, surface drives, any internal combustion engines September to January, and you can't have ATVs November through January. That's what this proposal is. So with that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Mr. Tuma, why haven't we allowed trolling motors up to this point? I mean, is there a concern, a biological concern, or are we concerned that when you leave that open, somebody's going to come up with the biggest, baddest trolling motor we've ever seen with, 100 amps of power, and he's blazing through these limited access areas? Is that something that we're worried about?
I think one of the things we do when we propose any new regulation is we're very cautious at first to see how things are going to play out. It was already allowed on the coastal WMAs, the trolling motors. Where it was not allowed was Beth, Russell Sage, Dewey Wills. Those areas have green trees and/or the habitat's not conducive to run a trolling motor through. So if you want to hunt a green tree with a trolling motor, you just pull in a battery and a trolling motor. That's my opinion. So I think at this time it's appropriate. And some of the Russell Sage, it was an old rice farm, so there are some flume ditches that are deeper. And Beth's the same way. Beth, when the river comes up in that limited access area, there's a lot of river current, so it's difficult for a user to paddle through it. So we just feel like it's probably not something that we need to worry about. So that, and for the sake of being consistent, we're just proposing this.
And one quick follow-up, the regs for trolling motors while under power are the same as a powered vessel from not being able to take animals from a moving vessel, that sort of thing. Do we know exactly what those regs as they relate to trolling motors?
That is correct. You cannot take an animal from a moving vessel under any power other than your own. It can't be under any artificial propulsion.
So you can't get around that with trolling motor, electrically
Correct. And
powered.
Chad would have to speak to that, but
That's correct.
Yep.
And that trolling motor needs to be up out of the water, similar to the boat. And forward motion stopped, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Motion to approve.
Have a motion.
Or accept, sorry.
Got a motion by Mr. Corville to second by Mr. Samony. Any discussion? Any public comment? Hearing none. Nothing from the commission. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
And then just as a reminder, public comment will be accepted through 9 p.m. March the 7th. And you can send those to me with all my contact information. And then I'll leave the public meeting dates and sites up for those who haven't seen it. But all this information can be found on the website, along with the amendments that you just accepted. They'll be published also. With that, any questions from anyone, I will entertain.
We do have some public comments on this. Can you turn the lights on? Sorry about that. Mr. Donald LaHost, would you please come to the microphone and state your name and address and who you're representing?
Good morning. My name is Donnie Lacoste. I'm from the Lake Charles area, Carlos, Louisiana. And I put on the comment card I was representing duck and goose hunters. This is my first commission meeting, and I apologize in advance for anything I say out of ignorance. There's probably a swath of that. I don't need to tell many people in here. I know Mr. Jakubczak has had conversations with my brother, and I'm a little bit perplexed as to the hunting dates and seasons and the reduction of, or the recommendation for reduction in bag limits. I think Mr. Corville was the only person who initially voted against the reducing the bag limit for teal for next season. I just, my family owns and manages nearly 8,000 acres. We spend thousands and thousands of dollars like a lot of other people do in the state. And I just don't understand why Louisiana and some of our rules and regulations are out of step with the rest of the country, why our season's open before Arkansas does. And there's been about a 20-year break in me living out of the state and hunting. And I really got out of the whole game, except now I have grandchildren. And it is only for that reason that I am back in the game. And I just don't see why we take it, for lack of a better phrase, in the ear, and other states, because of rules and regulations on what they do with crop and feeding and all that, they have a greater concentration of birds, yet we're the ones who reduce the numbers that we're allowed to take. I plan to attend a number of the meetings and I plan to participate so I can become more educated. But I don't think you're going to please a lot of duck and goose hunters by cutting their bag limits just because we had a really bad season this year. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to learning more about what's going on in the state of Louisiana, especially as it pertains to duck and goose hunting.
Thank you, Mr. Lacoste. Does anyone from the commission have any questions, Mr. Lacoste?
I'm sorry, where are you from, sir?
I'm from the Lake Charles area, Carlos, Louisiana. I grew up in New Orleans, so we hunted different things down there. So I had, as an adult, learned how to duck hunt. Matter of fact, I took my first greenhead in Miami Corporation about 40 years ago, and with my father-in-law, because believe me, I knew nothing about duck hunting at that time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lacoste. So, is that it?
You got any more public comment?
No more public comments. Commissioner Yaksak?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to take the opportunity to go through the teal bag limit issue briefly. Obviously, and I prefaced my motion last week with recalling a former commissioner who liked to test the water, so to speak, and see what the waterfowling community may think about any certain revisions or actions that the commission may consider. I also said that I'd be the first if response was negative or in a certain way or the other, I'd be the first to pull back on any given item. That said, I didn't say much about my motion last week, but I'll tell you a little bit in what I was rooted in. I think we can all agree that blue wings are the most important, not one of the most important ducks to our state and to our waterfowlers. We get at them in the spring, in September, and then of course we tend to enjoy them at the beginning of the season and sometimes at the end of the season, again as they start their trek back north. They are the earliest ducks to migrate and the latest to arrive. We have this early opportunity on them, and we lack in some information that could help us better understand them. Some teal seasons are good, some are bad. Is that because we have the season set at the least ideal time? We don't know, and there's a way now through technology that we can get at that. And we've seen some of that in our GPS transmitter studies with the white-fronted geese, the speckle bellies. That technology is now available for teal. Unbeknownst to me, our department had been working on such an important study for blue wings before I made my motion. And so Secretary Monase and I met and we discussed that study and that opportunity for this to learn more about blue wings and to make sure that we always have, hopefully, help us understand so that we do always have a September teal season. I consider it sacred. It's one of my earliest waterfowling memories. I was fitted with the smallest hip boots that a manufacturer makes. I was dragged down to the Atchafalaya Delta at 4 years old, and as I recall, the hip boots didn't have enough freeboard, and the ants and clusters were more plentiful than the teal were. And it was shortly after, obviously, a tropical storm event. Anyway, it means a lot to me. If the limit was 1 and the season length 1 day, I would teal hunt. Mosquitoes, heat, whatever you want to call it, I'd be out there. And so don't ever misunderstand my action for trying to limit somebody in any kind of undue way. My action is rooted in seeing what the community wants. I don't recall the waterfowling community. I don't recall a study when the feds said, "Hey, you guys go on and go to 6." I don't recall a study then about what our waterfowlers wanted. Maybe they all wanted more. I just know that before this season that I was contacted by several who said our teal seasons have really struggled since you went to 6. Why did we ever go to 6? And so I wanted to see what was out there. I think this department-sponsored study is going to be incredible. I think it's going to offer interesting information for this bird. I think we're going to be able to get at the exact timing of migrations, distribution, use of habitats as they come through. Are we just getting one push of teal at one certain time, or are they staggered? Where do they go? We don't know. We know they go south of the border. We don't have good band reporting data from harvest south of the border. We do know south of the border that countries still use contaminants like DDT. Does that have an effect on winter and teal? We don't know the answer to that. They still use lead shot in the country south of the border. Is there an effect? Is there a mortality event down there? We don't know. Maybe. I'm not suggesting that the department's new study will provide all those answers, but it could provide some information to help the next study get to those answers. I'm extremely proud of the Department of the Waterfowl Section, Secretary Monase, for pursuing that. And with that, I think in the event of having more information, it would be prudent to maybe to scale back on a reduction at this time. That said, when we do these things, we tend to hear from the people who are opposed. So I'm going to make a motion to amend the NOI to where it stays at 6, but that means for the next 60 days, it'll still be out there. I may not cure your email issues. You may continue to get emails, but for those of you that are fine with a reduction in light of finding out more information, then we'll still hear from you. And we'll all have to make a decision up or down on the 4 or 6 at the April meeting. So with that, I would ask one of my fellow commissioners to second the motion to amend back to 6, and we will move forward with this study and look to learn more about that species that we all appreciate so much. Thank you.
We have a motion by Commissioner Yaksak to amend the NOI to allow for 6 teal for the bag limit.
I certainly want to be the one to second.
And Commissioner Smitko seconds that motion. Do we have any comments?
I'd like to just make one.
Commissioner
I was a close second to Jerry's second, but what I'd like to do is echo Commissioner Yakubczak's comments to the department and Secretary Monache's leadership on this study. I think it's outstanding and shows a lot of vision. There's nothing like putting lines on a map and finding out where these things go. Yeah, it's a subset of our birds, but I think this is the beginning of utilizing technology on a lot of species. So congratulations to the department for your vision.
Thank you, Mr. Corville. Ms. Spitko.
Throughout the course of the comments over this NOI, I've been approached by a lot of folks with opinions as to why we are having what they perceive as less ducks in Louisiana. At some point, I'm going to want a full discussion of that and put it on the agenda. But before that, and basically it's all geared towards what's happening north of us. Before that, I'd like to get with members of the administration and staff and talk about it so I can better understand the problem. But I assure those folks who have reached out to me that it's something we're going to, I promise, we're going to explore. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Smitko. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, can I circle back to the public comment, specifically what Commissioner Yakumsek asked me about the limited access areas?
No, you can't.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, you can't. Mr. Two.
I wanted to
vote and then get to that.
I wanted to address, I'm sorry.
Yep. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose?
You didn't need a vote. It's just a motion and a second on an amendment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Taking votes on all the others.
Okay.
Okay, anyway, Mr. Tuma, thank you.
Okay, you had asking the question about limited access areas on the SCP app. I think what we are going to do, and I've talked with Steve and David and Lance, we have that email subset. For the first time in December, we had more people utilizing the SCP app than turning in paper cards. With that app, we now have email addresses to 20-something thousand people that we did not have before. So what we plan to do is use those emails to survey about limited access areas and other things on our WMA. So when I said that we didn't think the expense was justified, I left out, I'm sorry, I apologize, that we are planning to use the data that we get from the SCP app to get the answer that you're asking. So we will survey based on the use, based on the emails that we get from the SCP app, and limited access areas will be one of the questions that are asked on the survey. So I think we can get the answer of what you're asking through a survey that we send out to our WMA users that from the emails that we get from the SCP app. And that'll be different from the mail survey because it will just be confined to WMA users. It won't be for people who have not utilized. And we can even tease out waterfowl hunters on the WMAs. So I wanted to circle back and clarify that for you, okay? Thank you. Thank you, Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Tuma. We're on to Mr. Yakusak.
Thank you, Chairman. Last week, I also spoke about white-fronted geese, and I responded to a comment from the podium from a gentleman here asking us to reduce the season length and the bag limit on white fronts. At that time, I made the comment that I was considering a motion to reduce the season length from 81 days to 60 days. I've had some more dialogue about that. I've spoken with Waterfowl Section Leader Reynolds about how that season might fit. It seems to be the recommendation from him, if there was a reduction, is that it would be to run this white-fronted season concurrent with the west zone. That would provide a 60-day season. And the effect of that would be that coastal zone would be open a week without being able to harvest white fronts on the front of the season. On the end of the season, coastal zone would be open a week beyond duck season to be able to harvest white fronts. Obviously, west zone would run concurrent, and east zone, the effect would be that white front season would open a week earlier in the east zone than duck season would. And then it would begin a week earlier on the front end of second split and then run through the end of their season. So with that concept discussed, I'm again making this comment for the public and for the benefit of the regional meetings for further discussion on this issue. I'm a strong lean to making a motion. I'm not sure that I'd have a second here after the commission's had the experience they had with regard to blue wings. But white fronts are a little different. They're more regional. They tend to be hunted more heavily in southwest and south central Louisiana and then northeast Louisiana. So I'm particularly interested with comments in regard to that. At this time, I'm not going to make the motion. I'm going to provide the opportunity for people to provide comment in those regional meetings and of course through the normal public comment period. And I will be prepared to make a motion in March if there's a strong sentiment to throttle back. The issue there, as we've talked about many a times at these meetings, is that we have a real habitat problem here, especially in South Louisiana, and that we are seeing the percentage of the mid-continent population who visits our state decline, and it's declined tremendously over the last 20 years. With that, our harvest has declined. And so I don't have the answers, and I don't think anybody does. But the one question I ask, and Mr. Reynolds and I have had some good dialogue on this, is we can't necessarily change habitat overnight. I can't make a landowner change its land use practice. And but my question is there anything we can do in terms of harvest, in terms of season length, in terms of disturbance that will help our situation? I think any tried and true goose hunter, if you ask them today if we had a season length reduction or even a bag limit reduction now, if it meant that you could continue to have a white front season in South Louisiana in 20 years, I think they'd all say, sign me up. We're happy to self-regulate. Regardless of what's good for the flyway or the continental population, we want to make sure we can get after them right here in our backyard. So if I could get an answer on that or some guidance on that, then there's nothing we can do from a bag limit or season length or disturbance standpoint, then I'll gladly hold back. But I can't find that answer. So with that, thank you, and I look forward to any comment on this issue before our March meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Yakusak. We don't need,
Mr. Chairman, I've got
Commissioner Corwell.
one other thing, and I'm not at this time prepared to make a motion, but we looked at last year expanding limited access areas on Atchafalaya Delta WMA. We have a mud motor restriction on Passalute WMA. I'd like for, at some point, maybe perhaps to work with staff to look at opportunities to expand that limited access area on Passalute. So from a public comment standpoint, that's something that if people feel passionate one way or the other, they should feel free to weigh in. But regardless of that, I think that we've seen some benefit. I think when we made that motion last year to expand those limited access areas, we asked for feedback from the staff. So I'd like for those guys, when they have an opportunity, to share that with us, whether it was positive, negative, no effect, or whatever, from their professional evaluation. But I'd like to look at opportunities to expand limited access areas at Passalute. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Corville. We're going to go ahead and move on to agenda item number 10. Receive and accept the stock assessment report and striped mullet for transmittal to the legislature. Mr. Adrians.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm going to try to keep you on schedule here for your brunch. What you have before you is the annual striped mullet assessment. This comes to this commission annually. Nothing has really changed except we've added a year of data. The stock's still healthy, and I'll take any questions you have.
Does any of the commissioners have any questions of Mr. Adrians? Hearing none, thank you very much, Mr. Adrians. Do we have to do anything on this? We're just accepting the report. Do we need to vote on this?
Accept is probably an actionable item. Out of an abundance of caution.
Okay, so, would anyone like to make a motion accept?
Mr. Chairman, isn't this an annual thing that you have to make this presentation once a year?
This-
Right?
The stock assessment is generated annually by direction of the legislature.
So I'll make a motion to accept it.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Samini and a second by Commissioner Corville. Any discussion on it? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Adrian. Item number 11, to receive a summary presentation on the January Gulf of Mexico Fisheries Management Council. Mr. Sheepley.
Good morning, Commissioners and Mr. Chair. The first Gulf Council meeting for 2019 took place last week in Orange Beach, Alabama. It was a rather chilly meeting, but we got a few things done. I'm going to start out with the good stuff right away. As you probably know already, we were unable to take action or final action on two items that were slated to have final action votes on them because of the federal government shutdown. So we still made some progress on a lot of items over there, but unfortunately we couldn't vote on them. The first thing we addressed is our state management, and this is one of the items we could not vote on. This is Program Amendment 50. So the council reviewed draft amendments for establishing the state management programs for recreational red snapper. They added a new alternative and made it the preferred. And this would allocate the private angling annual catch limit among the states using the quotas initially requested in this EFP for this past year and our current year. And they distributed the remaining 3.78% between the two states of Florida and Alabama. The council also selected a preferred alternative that will allow states to create area or depth-specific regulations by requesting NOAA Fisheries close those areas of the federal waters adjacent to their states. Louisiana and Mississippi, however, mutually agreed to not implement those closures within our federal waters because of how it affects our adjacent borders. The council also...
Because of what?
So between Mississippi and Louisiana, the Chandler Islands fall within our state waters. If we were to close the federal waters off of the Chandler Islands under a closure for Louisiana, it would impact Mississippi negatively and vice versa. So we have a common joint enforcement area there during the snapper season. That's right around north of that.
Okay.
So it's a mutual agreement. Thank you. The council also clarified its intent to apply any necessary quota underage or overage adjustments in 2020 based on each state's 2019 landings under the exempted fishing permits. So for example, on this, get this to go, there we are. So these are the landings to date for all 5 states. If, for example, in this year, our second year of our EFP, we had the same percent harvested of our state ACL for the recreational sector, we had 99.2%, we would have a 0.8% carryover from the 2019 season into the 2020 season, which would be the start of state management under Program Amendment 50, instead of it just not getting harvested. So also, if we would go over like those other 2 states at the top, we would have to pay that back. So it filled a gap for a payback provision that wasn't present. Also, on the bottom of that table, I have our proposed 2019 ACLs for each of our states, and you can see there's an increase because of the TAC increase for red snapper. We go up to 816,439 pounds as opposed to what we had this year at 743,000 pounds. And the updated landings for Texas through December are listed there. They're at 75% of their ACL and still going.
Commissioner.
Go ahead.
Why does, go back,
Hang on.
why does Florida go up if they went over?
Everybody goes up. So the Gulf-wide allocation,
Where does their extra come out?
they pay back that difference. So they're at 113%. They're going to pay back that 13% out of their additional allocation. So you have to subtract that from their proposed 2019 ACL.
Okay, but so they don't get 1.9 million pounds. They get 1.9 million less
Minus
their,
13%, right?
okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Yeah, they're gonna pay.
Thank you, Mr.
Chairman.
Corville.
Mr. Shibley, how did Alabama and Florida sweet talk the rest of the council members to split up the 3.78%?
So we didn't have it last year. We fished to the same allocation, at least Louisiana did, as what this is proposed in our EFP. And I think it's a matter of if we don't get all 5 states, or at least the majority, to the table to vote on this soon, we're under the gun to not potentially have a state season.
Sure. So
in
as opposed to
2020.
arguing over a marginal amount of fish, it was ready to, I guess, this is just one more instance where those guys have big, I'm not going to get down in the weeds, but I just wanted to voice my objection of Florida and Alabama. I appreciate what you guys have done at the council, at this most recent council meeting, and I'm going to champion you guys at the end of your presentation, but I'll do it again now. Nice job representing Louisiana. I just wish we could get those guys back right. So along those same lines, you said, let me make sure I understand it right, at the end of the 2019 red snapper season, Gulf-wide, assuming, which we all think state management is going to make it through and it's going to vote and everybody's going to skip through the daisies together. If and or when Florida and Alabama or any other state overfishes in 2019, they will have to pay that back under Amendment 50 as it's currently written. Did I get that right?
You did. We added that at this meeting. So there's a gap in there that
outstanding
no one
job,
knew
gentlemen.
about, right? We don't know what would happen had we not put this in at this meeting. So,
right.
But the
Nice
most important part is our underage that we underfished,
And we can carry
0.8%. We should be able to carry that into the next year. So
terrific job.
We've got a lot of options.
Thank you, Mr. Corville. Commissioner McPherson.
I'm late to the party. Explain to me how Alabama, it must be on fishermen and landings as opposed to the area fished and the amount of stock that's contained, with Alabama having that very little slice of the Gulf. Is that correct? Is that the answer to my own question?
It's amazing that 164 miles of shoreline can get you that many fish, but they have got extensive artificial reefs that they put out in the water over a long period of time, and it's a lot of habitat, and they have a lot of fish. So they typically harvest a lot over the course of the years that are used in calculating that allocation.
I thought the oil companies had done that for us in Louisiana.
Well, we do too. We have a lot. It's just a different fishery. It's harder to get to our fish. You have to run 18 miles of the river to get out of Venice, first of all, and then you have to get to where you want to fish, where they access a lot closer to shore. So everybody has a different fishery.
Mr. Chairman, I got one more bite at the apple.
Mr. Corville.
I don't need an answer today, Mr. Shibley, but you guys provided a link that we're tracking landings throughout the year, and understand there's error on all parts of that with their different systems. And I don't want to jump up on a soapbox and start throwing stones, but it sure seems odd to me that the in-season reporting indicated one number, and then the now final number indicates a significantly different number, awfully close to their target. I'm not officially making a statement on whether I believe that or not, but it sure seemed odd. And at some point after this meeting, maybe somebody could help me understand how those discrepancies were rectified, but I don't need an answer today.
You're speaking for Florida, is what you're asking for?
I'm speaking
Texas?
for both of them.
Okay.
We can get down in the weeds on that at another time. I know the secretary's kind of hungry.
I want to hold up your lunch, so I'll go to the next slide. Let's see here. Okay, so this is a red snapper reallocation, which is among the sectors that we're talking about here. So council was presented with a draft options for an amendment that considers reallocating the catch limits. They removed an action that considered reallocating quota between the private angling and federal for hire components of the recreational sector. They expanded the range of the options to be considered for reallocating between commercial and recreational sectors. We're going to review and discuss an updated draft of this document at the next meeting in April. So keep in mind, this is just an options paper that we looked at the last meeting. This was the second item that we were supposed to take final action on at this meeting, but we're unable to. This is our historical for hire captain endorsements, where Louisiana started the white paper to get this going. I've got some basic background information, the first three bullets up there. You've seen it before. Essentially, the council modified this document to make replacement of the historical captain permits with standard hire for permits optional. So one of the issues raised by Roy Crabtree was that a very few, I think it was 6 of these historical captains don't actually have boats, right? They've got the licenses, but they don't currently have boats. So if you force them into the standard permit, they would lose out. They wouldn't be able to do this. So it gives you the option to where the majority can opt in or opt out. The business model for each captain can choose how he wants to handle this. So I think it's an improvement before we go to final action at the next meeting in April. Carryover unharvested quota. The acceptable biological catch, the ABC, in a carryover year could be set equal to the overfishing limit, OFL, for that year. The ACL, annual catch limit, could be set to this same level. If so, overfishing could occur in a carryover year. To account for management uncertainty and decrease potential for overfishing, the council proposed options to limit how much of a buffer between the ABC and the OFL can be reduced. The options are 25, 50, or 75%. Council selected preferred alternatives that modified the framework procedure to carry over the unharvested quota at 50%. There's going to be a webinar and public hearings that will be taking place before the next meeting on this subject. Gray snapper or mangrove snapper. Prior to 2018, the stock condition of gray snapper had not been evaluated in the stock assessment. In 2018, the gray snapper benchmark stock assessment was completed. That was CDAR 51. It was reviewed by the council's SSC committee in the May meeting of 2018. The SSC accepted the gray snapper assessment as the best scientific information available, and they determined that the stock is experiencing overfishing as of 2015. Council added alternatives to consider a definition of maximum sustainable yield at 26% of the SPR, or spawning potential ratio. It would allow for more harvest at a given stock size than the alternatives currently in the document. Council also added corresponding alternatives to modify the ACL. They selected a preferred alternative that would set the minimum stock size threshold at 50% of the biomass at maximum sustainable yield. Using the largest buffer of the alternatives considered reduces the likelihood the stock could be overfished again. Council also selected a preferred alternative that would define the optimum yield to 90% of fishing at maximum sustainable yield. The smallest buffer of the alternatives was considered. I know it's a lot of fish science there, but we'll move on. Modifications to the IFQ program.
Mr. Chairman?
Sorry.
So, Mr. Shibley, can you translate that into layman's terms? What's about to happen to mangroves?
So the stock assessment essentially says it's been overfished since 2015. However, the council moved to establish buffers that will prevent overfishing in the future, but also they're the least conservative options is what that is. So the SPR 26, we do red snappers at 30%. So it's a little bit less than what red snappers managed at.
So
in other words, they may or may not be overfished.
Looking through your crystal ball, do you anticipate meaningful changes from the feds for 2019 season, or are we looking at something down the road, if anything, in your judgment? I know it's hard to.
I think as long as it takes for these things to happen, it's probably gonna be the 2020 season before something like this would be final action.
Thank you.
Okay, so the individual fishing quota programs, council reviewed draft amendments. This is amendment 36B, if you're keeping track. They proposed actions that include requiring shareholders to have a federal permit, distributing shares that have been reclaimed by the National Marine Fisheries Service, establishing a quota bank, and requiring weight estimates provided and landing notifications to be accurate. So some of those landing issues were presented by enforcement during their enforcement committee meeting. There was underreporting of weights as vessels were hailing in, and that was pretty much the main contentious issue of this. The council specified that in part, the purpose of the document will be to increase access to individual fishing quota shares for eligible active commercial fishermen. Yep, sorry.
Commissioner Smith,
No, you're on track.
Oops, went the wrong way here. There we are.
Okay. The quota bank that the reclaimed shares are going into, is that a quota bank administered by NIMS or what?
Yep.
Okay, and to increase access to shares for eligible active commercial fishermen. Explain that to me, and does that increase access for the people that have the permits right now?
So the main driving force for this is for new entrants into the fishery. It's difficult for them to acquire shares to harvest, and a quota bank would make access more, I guess, more easily, readily available for them.
I understand, but what's gonna make, how is it gonna be new people who are seeking to gain access if it's restricted to eligible active? And how are we gonna keep those shares from going to the people who have all the shares? I'm just curious, is it some framework in place?
Yeah, so there's a percent reduction each year that goes on. So let's say you don't land your IFQ that year, there's a percentage of that that's taken back and put into the quota bank, right? And then
Okay.
let's say your friend is a new fisherman that's an active commercial fisherman, and he wants some shares, he qualifies, they come from that quota bank for him to start actively fishing.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sorry, that's not as clear as it could be. So Amendment 41 and 42, the charter and head boat management. After hearing comments from the ad hoc advisory panels, the council decided to postpone action on Amendment 41 and 42 until the electronic logbook data is available for federally permitted charter vessels and has been deemed suitable for management purposes. The council also decided to disband both of the ad hoc reef fishery head boat and ad hoc red snapper charter for hire advisory panels. So this isn't tabling, it's postponing. I think tabling has a different definition. Now I'm on shrimp. Council reviewed a draft of Shrimp Amendment 18 that considers increasing the amount of shrimp effort allowed in the special area that's monitored for juvenile red snapper bycatch. Analysis showed that the effort threshold can be reduced to 60% from the original 67%, which would allow a moderate increase in shrimping effort without affecting the rebuilding of the red snapper stock. Council selected preferred options that would modify the target reduction goal to 60%. Barotrauma, our outreach is holding workshops to create an action plan to promote the use of the barotrauma mitigation tools, so designing devices or venting tools, with the hopes of enhancing data collection efforts for discard mortality and incorporating those results in the stock assessment. They are not reinstating the requirements for barotrauma devices.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Shively,
Mr.
just
Corville?
jogged my memory. In our Amendment 50, I thought we had made notation of barotrauma or descending devices. Did we, is that still in there? Is it out of it? Where is it at?
The individual state amendments that go along with the program amendment have chosen preferred options, and it's included in ours and among 3 other states, I believe.
Give us the ability to require it, but I don't think that it's still in there. I'll have to check.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. No problem. You guys have been down a long winding road on Amendment 50 with a lot of changes, so it's understandable.
Electronic reporting for the for-hire industry. Council and NOAA Fisheries will be hosting these workshops to inform the for-hire operators about the new hail-out and electronic reporting requirements. New reporting requirements will be implemented for federally permitted charter and headboat vessels in the Gulf of Mexico. Vessels will have to hail out before taking a trip, complete an electronic report for each trip before offloading their fish, and have a device permanently affixed to each vessel, and a minimum archives vessel position, transmits that information to NOAA Fisheries. So some reminders here, a little housekeeping. The council has rescheduled the Louisiana workshop, which was originally on Valentine's Day. It's now going to be at 6 p.m. on February 12th at the La Quinta Inn and Suites on Williams Boulevard in Kenner, which is over by the airport. A representative from CLS America is supposed to be present at the meeting so the captains can inquire about getting the unit. Supposedly, there's still some units available for free. I talked with the representative at the last council meeting, and she stated there are about 150 of them, but that was before the meeting that was there, the workshop that was there, and captains were asking her about getting units there. I still think there's probably enough for about 82 or 84 for our fleet. This is the last call. After those units are gone, the captains will have to purchase the units themselves for well over $3,000. The special council meeting for final action on recreational red snapper state management has been canceled. I'm sure you all heard that already. So Amendment 50 will not be taking the final action until the April meeting. That's going to be in Biloxi between April 1 to 4.
Mr. Chairman, one final question. Thank you, Mr. Shibley. Do you guys have concerns that given this delay in this scheduling issue that NIMS and NOAA had, apparently that by taking final action in April, you will have a seamless transition from the EFP season to the 2020 red snapper season, or are we worried about that?
I think if it goes as planned in April and we take final action, everything should be fine. I think if we go past April, it'll start to get a little tenuous as far as the timing of things.
So it's April or bust.
Pretty close, yeah. And that's probably part of our motivation with the 3.78% that you questioned about earlier.
Okay. Thank you.
Let me just comment. I'm not so sure it's April or bust, but you start getting into questions about whether it's ready for January 1st, 2020. And so that has implications to states who want to start their state season on January 1st. It probably wouldn't have as many implications to us since we typically don't start January 1st. But then, of course, these days we have the concerns of government shutdowns and things like that. So you never quite know, but we feel pretty confident that April will get us there.
So along those lines, Assistant Secretary Banks or Mr. Shibley, how many months in advance of May do we need to have this thing final? Because I know dealing with the government, you have to have a specific amount of time for public comment, and then God knows how slow the government moves. I mean, I know, I guess what I'm worried about when we should be worried, caring that this is about to get derailed or come off the tracks or whatever. You probably need it 9 months to.
I would be very, very concerned if it does not pass final in April.
Okay.
Because after that, it's just going to be too hard to know what may happen. And I think that the momentum of this thing right now is such that it will pass. But as we all know about these kinds of things, as it gets farther and farther down the line, things get pushed back, start to lose votes here and there. So I would be very concerned if it doesn't pass in April.
And given that it's in Biloxi, it's a little bit closer for Louisiana anglers to pack up and make a short run at the beach and voice their support for Amendment 50. So again, thank you guys for what you do on that topic. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Corville. Anyone have any more questions of Mr. Shibley? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Shibley. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and confirm the May commission meeting date and location. Commissioners?
Commissioner Yakubczak, we can have a second or a final vote from what I could hear in the audio.
Okay, well, I'll make a motion. I'll second his motion any way you need to do it.
So we're going to have Commissioner Yakubczak make the motion for the May meeting in New Orleans, and Commissioner Samity second it. Any questions? Any comments? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll go to the setting of the June commission meeting. Anyone have a date and location that you'd suggest? It looks
June 6th here.
June 6th in Baton Rouge, 9:30. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're good. Public comments, I have one public comment card. from Charles Williams on Catahoula Lake. Could you come up and state your name and address, who you represent?
Thank you. My name is Charles Williams. I live in Greenville Springs here in East Baton Rouge Parish, native of Monroe though. I represent today the Louisiana Wildlife Federation, where I'm a member of the board of directors. The comment by the gentleman from Carlos earlier struck quite a chord with me, because when I was approximately age 12 in about 1960, he took me duck hunting for the first time on Catahoula Lake. And I managed to shoot with my single barrel 20 gauge a single mallard hen. It's the only duck we got. It was a great memory, and I've continued the sport my whole life, and I hope to be able and trying to introduce my grandkids to the sport as well. But it is a sport that's struggling now. Last month at the board meeting of the Wildlife Federation, this newspaper article was brought in, and many of us were already aware of the situation with Catahoula Lake potentially being lost as a public hunting area. And that was very upsetting. It led to some very lively discussion. And we decided at that point to go in, all in, so to speak, to use a poker term, to try to help the Attorney General's effort to get the cases turned around that have led to the situation that we have now and that we're dealing with. We have, I just wanted to point out to the commission members and public our press release, which we put on our website a few days ago, stating our position on this matter, as well as our brief, our amicus brief that we have had prepared, along with two co-sponsoring organizations, those being Delta Waterfowl and an organization, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. The three of us have put this brief forward, and it is going to be expanded on further. The Supreme Court has notified us that our brief will be considered in their deliberations. Now, their deliberations at this point are whether to do an appeal or not, whether to hear an appeal. And we're hoping that will be positive, obviously, and if it gets to that point, there'll be a lot of additional papers put forward. But I did want to read just for a moment here. This is not on the technical legal points, but this is from our amicus brief. The record is clear. The Catahoula Lake has been enjoyed by outdoor enthusiasts as a public asset and conduit to this state's immense natural resources for generations prior to this litigation. The potential loss for the public's use of this habitat is offensive enough to merit this brief. But what is more, for decades, at least since 1969, Catahoula Lake Complex has been managed by both federal and state agencies using public funds for the benefit of the hundreds of species that call it home and use it as a key rest stop. We all know about the canvasbacks, the pintails, and the ringneck ducks in the summer when the water's down. It's the shorebirds. And for that reason, for those reasons, Catahoula Lake a couple of decades ago was designated as a wetland of international significance. Okay, this is a very serious matter. So I really just came to let you know where we stand on this. We're going to be out there fighting by supporting this brief. And if you want to know more about our position, these documents, the press release and our brief are on our website, Louisiana Wildlife Federation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Do you have any questions of Mr. Williams, Commissioner McPherson?
No question. I do want to compliment the Federation, the other two organizations in filing that brief. I actually today sent all the commissioners a copy of that brief and several other briefs. One of the ones that I would direct you to is the one that was filed by the National, and I may have the name wrong, the National Society of Engineers and Land Surveyors or something. But the implications of this goes much farther than Catahoula Lake and with its great importance to waterfowl habitat. But if this decision stood, it would be dramatically changing the law to where in the past, the GLO surveys, the U.S. Government Land Office surveys, which were done when the Swamp Lands Act and lands were given to the states, it would allow collateral attack without going through the current process of that. So if this suit stood, it just does away with all former surveys, with all titles, all chains of titles. Anybody can go back in with their surveyor and their expert and say the GLO made a mistake. So there is no beginning of a patent, no beginning of title with this thing. So it's almost unbelievable that they could have gotten to this point with the Third Circuit. Most of y'all very good friends of mine, and had this ruling. And so it's important that the Supreme Court act, but this would affect Bistineau. I'm probably advocating against my own personal interest on some lakeshore properties that I own on a couple of different lakes. But this has far-reaching implications for not only Catahoula Lake, but for other conservation areas within the state of Louisiana. So I would encourage you to read those briefs and try to, we all understand the importance of this. And I appreciate the brief that this department filed also, Co. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pearson. With that, look for a motion to adjourn. A motion adjourned by Commissioner Salmon, second by Commissioner Corville. Thank you.
We need several.
I don't know. Hey, Donnie.
Yeah.
That's it.